I'm Michael Freudenberg, this is Film Masters. We're now at part 12 of the Apprehension engine build. We're going to be doing the right hand side, finishing that off, and then putting our first soundboard onto the very front of the Apprehension engine. So let's get straight into the tutorial. At the end of this tutorial, it's going to look like this, so let's get straight into it. So first of all, if you've already started cutting out the right-hand side, as I said in the previous tutorial, similar to the left-hand side, it's no different. The only difference is we're going to be putting a hole in it. So I've pre-cut this out, so make sure you follow the previous step. One thing we need to take into account is where the bearing goes. So what we're going to do is line it up against the frame on the right-hand side. I'm going to use a pencil. If you don't have a pencil, you can obviously, that fits in there. You can use a large nail, for example. However, I'm happy that this pencil fits perfectly. And I'm just going to make a mark. And as you can see, it's on the inside. I'm just going to use a black felt marker in order to make it stick out a little bit better. So that's where we need to drill a hole so that we can put our crank for the hurdy-gurdy wheel. I'm going to be using a tool now called a flat tool bit. And I'll be using that to drill the hole. Now you can use a larger drill. However, I find that this tool is quite good at drilling a hole. You just stick it in to where you want to start drilling. And then as it drills down, don't put too much pressure on it because it's plywood. You don't want to damage it. So just let it do its job as it scrapes the top off. Now, the secret to making sure that you don't rip all the outer skin off the plywood is to drill down about halfway and then flip the wood over. So flip the plywood over and then start again, and don't put too much pressure again onto it. Just let the tool scrape and do its job, and it will make a nice clean drill all the way through. And then once you've done that, obviously you can sand it using a sander or hand sand it just to make it smooth. This part won't be visible anyway. It's going to be hidden under another part, but the reason we're doing it is so that the crank can come through. Now I'm going to be using the same chipboard screws as before from the other side, and I'm just going to make sure that the hole that we've drilled does line up with our bearing, and it does, so I'm pretty happy with that. And now it's just on to gluing the actual side into place. So I'm going to speed up the video because you don't need to see this whole process again. So you'll see the glue adhere or be applied really quickly to the frame. But once we've done that, it's just a matter of then putting that side onto it, same as what we did on the previous side, lining it up. And once you're happy with it, start to drill it and put your screws into it to secure the part. Now, I'm using screws for this part. Again, you don't need to use screws when you're applying it. You can nail it in, or obviously you can glue it in and put it in with some G clamps or C clamps or D clamps in order to hold the part together until it dries. However, I wanted to speed up the process. Now, this is a tool that is used for marking. It's called a Mortise marking gauge. And how it works is you use the large side in order to screw it in and use the sharp points in order to mark the timber. And how you use it is you line it up, you tighten it, and then that same mark remains there all along as you're applying it to the timber. So, for example, now I know that that's the same measurement as the other side. For example, I'm just going to use a black marker to mark it where I'm going to drill it. But that's another tool that you can use. You don't have to use one, but it is another way of speeding up your workflow in order to make sure that your measurements are all the same if you're not using a ruler, for example, or a rule or tape measure. So I'm going to speed up this part of the process again because this is something that you've already seen before where I apply the screws to the other side. Again, we're going to be putting 7 screws into the right-hand side, so on all corners. And again, it's just mimicking what's happening on the other side. Again, if you're not using screws, that's fine. You can use nails in order to hold this part in. The reason I'm using screws is because I want it to make it look rustic on the outside. So while I'm doing that, I just want to talk to you about the next upcoming videos. We are going to be working on the soundboard next. And once that's all cut and put to size, we'll be able to organize it so that we can then put the hurdy-gurdy wheel in finally and the crank, get that all set up. And then we'll be moving on to putting on the guitar necks onto the actual Apprehension engine box itself. And the box will almost be complete. So here we have the hole. I'm just making sure that the hole is perfectly aligned in order so that the bearing isn't going to be rubbing against the actual right-hand side soundboard of the box. Now we'll be working on the front soundboard, which will go in the very front. Now, I'm not going to glue it in because I want to be able to replace it. I'm going to be using these tacks. They're actually upholstery tacks. They're like a large tack that you use for pinning stuff to a board. However, it's used for holding upholstery down. Now, I do have a stack of plywood that I've been picking up. This is all packing stuff. So again, you can create your apprehension engine fairly cheaply if you're looking for the right materials, scrap stuff around. A lot of places like hardware stores have it lying around because they use it for packing and they throw it away. So ask them. Now I'm going to use this. It is 3 millimeters thick. It is 3-ply. And I'm just going to show you in inches, the thickness, so that you understand metric and imperial measurements for this. And now I'm just going to measure it against the front leading edge, or the front face of the apprehension engine box. So I'm going to line it up. I'm going to make sure that it's all aligned to the back and the corner of where the plywood is. I want to keep some of that detail there. As you can see, it's going to be lined up, so there's a little bit of overhang, and this allows me to sand it back. It's always good to leave a little bit more material when you're doing this because it's easier to remove stuff than it is to add it on again. And again, I'm just going to use my box to outline the front board. Now, this helps if you've made an error again in your box and it's slightly off, because you'll be actually cutting it to your box that you've created. I'm going to use a jigsaw to cut this template out, and I'm using a very fine tooth bit that goes in there. You don't want it too thick. You can get different saw bits that go into a jigsaw. Some of them are very, they've got large teeth on it. The problem with that is it will actually rip the plywood. So you want to get something that's got really fine teeth on it so it just cuts and doesn't rip the material that you're working with. Now I've put some heavy stuff on top of it so it doesn't move around while I was cutting it. That's why there's it's sitting underneath the apprehension engine box. So, and now it's just a matter of lining up our templated soundboard, our 3mm thick soundboard, onto the very front. Again, don't glue it on there. The reason I'm not gluing it on there is, say you use it a lot, if you do wear it down, which would obviously take a lot of use, at least I can then knock it out and make another one and then use those upholstery tacks that I'm currently hammering into the front of it to secure it. I can knock that out and then replace it. So that's one of the parts that we do need to make sure is replaceable. Now the soundboard that goes on top will also be set up. It will have screws in it though. However, the actual top soundboard itself will be something that can be removed so you can get into the box and work on it if you need to, or if there's an issue with it later on, or if you want to replace something on it. Now, you don't have to use upholstery tacks like I'm using. You can use screws. So that's another way. I'm just using upholstery tacks because I think it looks pleasing to look at something that looks old, and obviously something that looks like it's been handmade, and it's an apprehension engine, so it's going to be a horror music device, so we want to add a little bit of horror to it and make it look like it's meant to make that type of noise. So again, this is your apprehension engine, so you can do whatever you want to it. You can dress it up and create something unique with it. You can put your own stencils on it, or you can sit there and actually draw pictures all over it if you want to. So that's something that you can do. Just be mindful, don't put any paint on it, don't put any clear coats on it, because it will change the soundboard and the sound that it does make. So that's something you don't want to do. So here you can see I've got a little bit of damage on there, and I'm using a sander in order to make it stand out more. And again, this is just a part of dressing up the box and making it look different, so look worn, look used, look like it's part of a horror musical instrument. So that's what I'm doing, and obviously this is what it looks like on the other side, where I scuffed it up just a little bit just to make it look unique and personally mine. And here is our apprehension engine box. I'm going to use a percussion mallet now. Now that's something that I've shown you how to make once before in the horror or little box of horrors tutorial. One thing you'll notice when you hear that, it's secured nicely. There's no distortion or vibration. It sounds like a nice box that's secure, and it's also got a nice ambience about it. So when we work on the next tutorial, we'll be making the soundboard that sits right up the very top here. And we'll also be cutting out bits and pieces for the hurdy-gurdy wheel, which will then follow up in another tutorial. We'll also need to put some extra supports in there, but we'll cover that in the next upcoming tutorial. So this is part 12 done. And that is part 12 of building the Apprehension engine. We've now finished the right-hand side of the actual Apprehension engine, and we've also got our very first soundboard secure, ready to go start making some howling horror sounds with it. In the next part, which will be part 13, we'll be building the actual soundboard, measuring it up, and putting it in ready to go so we can secure that before we start putting our guitar necks together and get this box finally finished. If you want to become a Filmmaster subby, it's pretty simple. You can subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Facebook and or on Twitter. And until next time, don't just film it, master it.